and who then gave me an opportunity to teach for that department, and who made me realize how misguided I was in many respects about my life and my commitment, and thanks to whom, Reynaldo and many others, I have the job that I have right now. So I can't be thankful enough, and I always, just in the very Catholic tradition, self-flagellate because of that, not going out with him in that moment, but in any way I can, I always acknowledge this in public, I guess, as penitencia. He has been an involved educator in Los Angeles. He is an activist, history teacher, used to be history teacher in the school district, and a traditional Aztec dancer and community organizer. He's the co-founder and current executive director of Semilla Sociedad Civil, a nonprofit organization that operates 2 public charter schools in East Los Angeles, Chinacalmecal Academia Semillas del Pueblo, a K-8 institution, and Anahuacalmecal International University Preparatory High School. And he's a star. That's the only, I'm going to summarize it that way because of what you'll see. One of the things, and I'll conclude with this, when I told Marcos years back, and you heard this, and Patricia yesterday, sorry, indulge me on this, I told him, Marcos, what are you going to do when your kids come out to reality? How are they going to integrate into society? And he looked at me, very peaceful, very calm, and he said, I don't want them to integrate. I want to create new men. Men, not in the gender sense, but new people, new humans. And that basically, if he had made me look bad with the activism, that killed me. That response, I never get over it.
Thank you very much. Ilwika Campa, Tlaltipacampa, Quisayan Tonasle, Calaquian Tonasle, Mictlampa, Huiztlampa, Tonacatecutzintle, Tonacasihuatzintle, Omoticutzintle, Ipanse Xixtle, Ipanse Mestle, Ipanse Tonalzi, Tameticlatzocamachilisle, Tonican Chaneque, Tongva, Gabrielino, Iwan Towewetke, Iwan Tolamatke. So thank you very much, first of all, in my traditional language, my maternal language, Nahuatl, and the maternal language of many, many people in this continent. It's a language that if we do not ourselves reclaim, may very well disappear. Semillas, first of all, is not by any means a product of my person, but is actually a continuation of decades of struggle. Dr. Reynaldo Macias and Dr. Juan Gomez Quiñones in particular have guided us since the early meetings where we met in their homes and discussed the ideas, which my wife, Minnie Ferguson, is a co-founder and a collaborator and co-conspirator, currently at the school, running the school, allowing me to be here. Have dedicated so much passion to, as well as Dr. Irene Vasquez, who's now the chair of the Chicana and Chicano Studies Department at Dominguez Hills. And this core of people united many more people, as we have in the past, fighting for what we consider to be our roots and our right to be able to educate our children collectively based upon our roots. The struggle for Chicana and Chicano Studies here at UCLA, of course, it's a little weird to be here. I challenged Raymond Paredes in this very room, who was fighting very hard to make us believe that American studies would solve all of our problems instead of defining and creating a department of Chicana and Chicano Studies. And in the room next door, my wife and I, along with the 100 other students that stormed the building, were arrested with a very interesting Jamaican UCLA police officer who was afraid of our eagle feathers for some reason. He was like 7 feet tall, and that's what he was afraid of. Semillas is a community-based autonomous institution, as we envisioned the department would be, as we envisioned probably 30, 40 years ago the Chicano Studies Research Center should be. It's an autonomous institution to be able to develop autonomous knowledge, to be able to develop autonomous people. And that autonomy is something difficult to organize. Our experience grew through labor organizing movements that we experienced as students here, our depth and study of the Mexicayot, what we call now the Anahuacayot, indigenous affirmations of our peoplehood and our knowledge, and the Plan de Aztlán and the Plan de Santa Bárbara, of course, were founding documents in our understanding of the movement. And the coyunturas that came around 1992 of indigenous movements that have been struggling for decades, that in 1992 with the quincentennial anniversary struck a chord again 2 years after that, of course, on a continental and international level. And then we became teachers in LAUSD and got a little smack of reality in the classroom as well, which was something that motivated us. Just to be clear, on the use of names, the U.S. Census is finally counting Mexicans and indigenous people from throughout Latin America as distinctly recognizing them as Native American. The Office of Management and Budgets defines Native American as a person having origin in any of the original peoples of North America and who maintains cultural identification through tribal affiliation or community recognition. And so after decades of explaining that we're indigenous to this land, at least the White House gets it, and the census gets it. And we developed as indigenous people, falling into this path of Xinaxcalmecac and eventually Anahuacalmecac, and trying to develop ourselves as organic intellectuals committed to our people, as cultural workers in the Freudian sense, as guías in the Mayan sense, and as elders, even though we're younger than many, in the very real sense that there is a lack of leadership in the community in many different levels. And so then the school, Semillas and Anahuacalmecac, becomes what we proposed, a Calpuli, a community center, and actually an organizing center of community, in which the role of the student should not be simply defined as a future worker, but should be conceived of as broadly as possible as a future servant leader in an indigenous sense, and that is somebody that serves the people. The school received a very strong attack, for which Dr. Reynaldo Macias famously said, "Since when is teaching more wrong?" We were attacked by I think the same right-wing movement and think tanks as they were preparing to take on the struggle in Arizona that they took on, that attacked us for teaching Chinese, that attacked us for teaching cultural values, that accused us of being self-segregationist, that misquoted me and my questioning for the gentrification, if you will, of the concept of civil rights and the inappropriate application of the simple concept of civil rights to indigenous peoples when there's really so much more to that. And we were accused of being a madrasa simply because we were a non-hegemonic institution of education. The root of the concept of teaching our students comes from an ancient trajectory of knowledge that has been developed over the last 10,000 years in terms of people's memory, and probably even longer than that. And in the last 1,000 years or so, the development of institutions of learning called Calmecac and Telpoxcali and Ixpoxcali in Mexico and elsewhere were given different names in different languages. And these were schools that were models of public education, that they were decentralized, they were intergenerational, multilingual, international, humanistic, naturalistic, and very importantly, cosmic. And the most important protagonist that we can think of that benefited from that trajectory or that heritage of knowledge of education is Tata Emiliano Zapata, Botan Zapata. Tata Emiliano Zapata was a Nahuatl-speaking leader from Morelos, the state of Morelos, which coincidentally has currently about 100,000 students in the indigenous education system that speak Nahuatl. And he was educated to the point of speaking about 12 indigenous languages. And he used that social capital, that cultural capital, to be able to organize during the Mexican Revolution, and gave speeches in different languages, including in Spanish, obviously. So Semillas called on that trajectory to recruit students who came from the local community, but they also came from other like-minded parents and organizers and educators and workers that were seeking a school that wouldn't chastise their child for having long hair if he was a boy, or embarrass their daughter if they had a traditional blouse. And that concept of having simply a space where our students could represent themselves was important to us and significant in and of itself. After the assault on the school from which the community defended itself, and many of you were probably a part of that defense in different ways, and we had allies everywhere, in LAUSD, in the LAPD, in the city councilman's office, all over. And so it really was a citywide response to that attack against us. We had already begun a process of improvement, wanting to seek the best, not simply seek a respite from the attacks. And had already begun the process of becoming an IB World School. The International Baccalaureate is recognized by many as the premier international educational model, which is problematic, of course. But it's nevertheless a network of about 2,000 schools around the world, has been growing dramatically, mostly in the United States. It's most famous for its oldest program, which is the diploma program, which, if completed, gives a student recognition of 2 years of a university education, and they're much more likely to succeed and graduate within 4 years, 4 to 5 years, than a student who may have passed so many AP exams as a comparison. The diploma program and the IB itself is based on constructivist models of thought and education, and they reinvented themselves, if you will, a few years ago, about a decade ago, by creating a K-5 program called the Primary Years Program and a 6th to 10th grade program called the Middle Years Program. The diploma program only services 11th and 12th grade students. And so it was a bit of a bottom-up restructuring that they're still going through right now, and that we're fortunate enough to be a part of that dialogue. It involves important things like a learner profile, which establishes a set of criteria for character development. It includes metacognitive skills and making the student conscious of those metacognitive skills and that level of self-reflection. And it's inquiry-based in its approach and begins with questions and asking questions and wondering and trying to preserve that approach to education. It's international, beginning with the concept of respecting the mother tongue of the child. So if you think of communities in Brazil who may speak German, it made sense that they wanted to keep their German language because someday that kid would grow up and go back to Germany. And here it has to make sense to us also because we're not growing up and going anywhere. We're simply growing here. And so... And so the mother tongue is important, and the IB program includes, in an obligatory way in the school, the necessity to teach both mother tongue and another language. And they strive for keeping those languages on the same social value, same level of social value. There's, it's the prestige of a European model of education, previously an English model of education, and it has private school roots. And Gramsci might say it's just another part of the Americanization or the remastication of the old European culture. But nevertheless, the Americans are paying attention because they're concerned that they're falling behind. It's been attacked as well. There's a threat that the IB represents United Nations takeover of the United States, and it's coming from the same people that are attacking multiple languages, and they've had to defend themselves, as ridiculous as that sounds from that. But as we intersect with them, they're concerned with what they call access, the IB, what the IB calls access to the highest quality of education possible. And they're currently being implemented across the United States, and we'll see how successful it is, in large urban school districts as a turnover strategy. And I think largely due to our influence, as well as the IB's own public relations, I'm sure, the LAUSD has followed suit in our establishment of becoming the first City of Los Angeles public school to become an IB World School. Now we have all the feeder pattern schools around us also working to become IB World Schools, as well as several other patterns within or feeder complexes within the LAUSD. I remember a meeting with the superintendent where he thought that was his idea, but whatever. So the IB is a way for us to translate our goals to mainstream society. They are there are ways for us to develop, alter, bypass, and challenge the paradigm in public education, but we live within certain contradictions as a charter school. The district measures us by standardized test performance, as does the federal government, and has to give that priority over anything else, and so then we have to address that. And that creates an inherent contradiction for charter schools as a funding model. It creates a high-stakes nature of charter approval and reapproval, which incentivizes discrimination upon enrollment, and it also creates a de facto subpar funding model for charter schools and subpar facilities for the most part, which then makes charter schools over-reliant on philanthropy, which has its own ideological bent. Even if they don't have any strings attached to the philanthropy, it's still an ideological position. And it becomes, unless we contest it, an ideological regurgitation of a free market dogma, which uses words like choice and competition and profit and entrepreneurialism, and political military hegemonic goals are uttered in the same breath as the innocuous calls for college-bound access for all. Because all of a sudden we're talking about needing to learn Chinese because the Chinese are coming to get us. And we're having to talk about 21st century skills because Americans are falling behind. And we're having to concern ourselves with what these kids are going to become because otherwise they're just filling the jails. And these are very complex issues that are really all revolved around the lives of our children. And so they become these political bullets that people are shooting at each other. The China connection to us, and the Chinese in particular, are mirrors for us. We see them not as model minorities, and nor do we see them only as what they call the Mahu, which is the mother tiger. So if the students in Shanghai are outperforming everybody around the world, what are they doing in Shanghai? Well, the Chinese professor pointed out that it may have more to do, and so their success in Shanghai may have more to do with funding and attention and political oversight to Shanghai as opposed to rural schools in China elsewhere that have the same kind of poor conditions in third world countries anywhere around the world. But it's a parallel to us as indigenous people because they're also a millennial people that has autonomous intellectual roots that they've developed, and autonomous pedagogies and autonomous trajectories, whether the United States likes it or not. And that helps us to create an understanding among community of the importance of identifying our autonomous roots and identifying our autonomous connections. We've received support from different organizations along that line of philanthropy. We couldn't have opened without the support from the Raza Development Fund and the National Council of La Raza, which in turn received support from the Gates Foundation, which after a while didn't like the results of the funding that they were investing in NCLR, and so they pulled their funding and went with large urban districts. Let me advance here through this because I obviously didn't time myself well. And that the concern that we have now as we move forward, as we begin to look at the state of education in Mexico, as we begin to concern ourselves with the sources of where our students are coming from and our teachers, is an important document that's called the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which very clearly outlines, after over 30 years of lobbying in the United Nations on the part of chiefs and leaders across Native and the Native world, the importance of education, and not as an asset to the United States, but as an asset to our own peoples. Not as an asset for some future political military goal or some future economic goal, but as an asset to ourselves as human beings in whatever country, government, state, or political apparatus we may live in. We concern ourselves with what Davis Wade, a famous ethnologist from Canada, calls ethnocide. And that's the loss to the world of the loss of our cultures and languages. And that's obviously a much bigger issue than LAUSD can take on right now by itself. But it's nevertheless our concern, and it's the concern of our people. Thank you very much for your time. And I do have some DVDs with a short film that we created in 2006. They're free at the back, and my business cards are back there too. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Marcos. Now I'm going to read briefly Dr. Lindholm-Leary's bio. And the title of, I didn't actually read the titles of either of your presentations.
Let me hold you just a second.
Sure. It's, yeah, I know.
I'm going to like lower everything and then just jack it up a bit. Sometimes that quells it.
Gives me more time up here, so I'll take it.
Agreed.
See, fate helps me. And technology. Well, I can actually read it that way while you fix it. She's a professor emeritus of child and adolescent development at San Jose State University. Her research interests focus on understanding the cognitive, language, psychosocial, and societal factors that influence student achievement, with a particular emphasis on culturally and linguistically diverse students. She has worked for years in two-way immersion and other bilingual programs in over 60 school districts in 12 states, and has consulted with various state departments of education and the U.S. Department of Education. She received her PhD in developmental psychology from UCLA, where she worked at the Spanish-speaking Mental Health Research Center and the Center for Language Education and Research, and she has received numerous awards. Again, the title of her presentation is Building Dual Language Programs, and Patricia, Robert, and Luis will be running through it.
So why don't you guys come up here? ¿Te parece? Or is it easier to speak from there, you think? Okay, so I'm going to put it mostly on Robert and Luis, but I have to, somebody needs to tell me how I find the presentation here first.
Let me see if I can help you.
Thank you. It's not evident here. And while you're doing that, we could have just simply said, oh gosh, this is really terrible, Catherine isn't here. And so, great, it's the last one there.
Leary?
Yeah, if you'll put it up for me, thank you. But Catherine's work is so important, and she was good enough to send forward her PowerPoint. And given that Robert and Luis and I actually went to graduate school with Catherine also, and have been reading her work over years, I am optimistic that we can do a not great job, but a decent job of communicating to you the nature of her research. Catherine Lindholm-Leary is one of those unique individuals who just takes like a laser beam approach on something and develops it year after year, decade after decade. And so I don't think there is anybody in the country with a larger body of research on dual language programs, two-way dual immersion programs, where she's tracked kids over a very long period of time to see what really happens. So we didn't want you to miss this. So we are going to try and do our best job. Robert, you want to kick off? And
one of the things that used to happen in graduate school is that Patricia would say, I just have to go to the store, come with me. 7 hours later. Going to Macy's and the cleaners. And finally ended up at home, so she's fallen back into her old patterns.
I never dropped those patterns, actually.
Keep in mind that we haven't seen anything that Catherine has said.
Yeah, we're all looking at this for the first time.
I think one of the issues, like I said this morning, is that too many times people think of this as just a language issue, and this whole constellation of the attitudes, the kinds of the additive nature of the dual language programs is likely just as important as the language of instruction. So I think that's one of the things that's really distinguished the dual language programs from both bilingual and English-only kinds of programs.
And I think we'll see a little later on. I haven't seen it either, I'm guessing. But this concept of social cultural competence applies not only to the students, but to the teachers.
Yeah, we need you in the microphone, Luis.
That concludes my presentation. The point is that this concept of social cultural competence is as relevant for the teachers as it is for the students within this particular dual language model.
Okay. Super awesome, cool, magnífico es un privilegio. This must be...
It's additive.
Additive. Psychosocial additive. Okay, that's... Former English learners in dual language close the achievement gap with English speakers. So in this slide, Catherine is looking at some of the research she has done over a number of years. Reclassified students entered school as English learners but are now proficient in English by grades 5 to 6. I don't know if Kenji's still on. Oh yeah, there's Kenji. You know, Kenji, I really ought to have you involved in this too. But I think the point here is that Catherine's work has looked at the development of children's language competencies over time. And we know that if you go in too early in these dual language programs and you try to assess kids and see where they're doing in the first 1 or 2 years, everybody panics. Oh my God, they look terrible in English. They're doing awful. And I know in the work that Catherine did with Fred, Genesee, and others, this was one of the big points they wanted to make is you've got to stay with it. And I think it's one of the points we tried to make also at the community school, right, Karen? You've got to stay with it because it does take a little while. But by 5th or 6th grade, in the great majority of these programs, we're seeing the kids then coming up par and beyond other students. You guys see something else there?
Well, I think it just reiterates the major finding over time that of all the language approaches, the dual language is the one that has the most positive outcomes. And students, there's no penalty to students' acquisition of English. So.
Can you hear Robert back there? No. Okay. We really need you next to the microphone.
Now that I've forgot everything that was said. I was just saying that the findings reiterate everything that consistently has been found with dual language programs, that of all the language education approaches, these are the most successful, and it's not at a cost to students' English. So, it really becomes a question of why don't we do this everywhere?
It's probably important to point out too, which we didn't do at the beginning, that the dual language programs really seek a balance of monolingual English speakers who are attempting to learn the target language, in most cases Spanish, and Spanish speakers who are learning English, so that in these programs, the notion is really to balance it with children from at least two language backgrounds, and for them then to share in the knowledge, both cultural knowledge and linguistic knowledge that they have with each other. Catherine, I'm noticing also that in these slides, she consistently is including in here the sociocultural aspects, more comfortable interacting with students from other backgrounds, more positive attitudes towards school. So these being very important aspects of the dual programs. This is a lot to read really fast. Many challenges facing dual language: lack of administrative support, attaining high levels of language and literacy in Spanish, and lack of support for Spanish-English learners' recognition of second language bilingual skills. Most recognition given to English speakers, especially non-Latinos. Some Spanish-speaking English learners pulled from the dual language program if not showing sufficient growth. You want to comment on?
I think it highlights one of the difficulties in evaluating all the language education research is that you can't just go by the label. So whatever the label is, there's a whole range of things that can vary, including some of these dimensions. And so I think that's one of the things that makes the findings and the interpretation of the bilingual effectiveness study so hard to. Sometimes it's comparing apples and oranges, and especially the early studies, it just went by, they never did any fidelity of treatment kinds of observations. So You had just a range of really good programs all the way to really poorly structured programs where English was, I think an early study by Lily Wong Fillmore found that in the classrooms that were labeled bilingual, English was a predominant language like 70 or 80% of the time. So just the fact that you call it bilingual or dual language doesn't necessarily tell you much about it.
Our colleague Guadalupe Valdez at Stanford has also written extensively on this issue of the privileging of English and how very difficult it is, even in the very best programs. And I know Marcos is thinking about this a lot too, and what he's doing at Semillas. Because in these dual language programs, it is very hard to get away from the message that English is really the important language in this society. And so achievement in English tends to be celebrated more than achievement in Spanish, as does the resources that are applied. And so the children who are learning Spanish, I mean, I know Guadalupe talks about this a lot, and the children who are learning Spanish is, oh, isn't that fabulous that they're learning Spanish? Wow, look at those kids. You know, and the kids who are learning English still oftentimes suffers from a deficit thing, like, oh, well, you know, how are they doing? Are they doing well enough? Well, are they getting some English? Just a very different kind of metric applied to the two of them. And then she here also appears to be talking about the lack of administrative support oftentimes. If people are, if little or no training for dual language teachers to implement quality programs. So, well, I think this goes back to Megan's presentation earlier too. If we are not growing really strong, high-quality bilingual teachers, where do the teachers come from to implement programs like this? Otro comentario?
Well, it also shows that the dual language programs are not immune from the broader social and ideological pressures of any school, right, or of any school system, ranging from privileging English at the expense of Spanish, in this case, and the issue of how do we prepare teachers for this particular model, as well as issues of social stratification, I'm sure will be present.
I don't know.
At Techie, you're not.
No, clearly. 18. No, veo, because it shows 18 slides here.
Patricia was in English-only classes.
This is what I had to put up with when I was in graduate school. Yeah, no, I think maybe that was it. Maybe that was it. Yeah, it hasn't changed. Yeah. Okay, maybe that was the last slide. Can't say. But
How are these slides?
Oh my goodness! Yeah, there were a whole bunch more.
It says there.
I think you need to enroll in Semillas.
Okay, so that was the explanation of what it is. We were probably supposed to start back there, you guys. So
No, that was already done.
About there were two earlier.
We started in the middle?
Different one.
I don't know.
We started in the middle?
Yep. Probably. Not my fault, I didn't put it up. Catherine shows, okay, let's stop here, okay? This was a very nice one. School success from the dual language high school students' perspective, their attitude. So if she were here, she would tell you what the sample was and how many people were involved in all of this. We don't know that, but we do know that she has carefully collected these kinds of data over 2 and 3 decades now. And she talks about how surveying the students who are high school students who've been through these dual language programs, 79% surveyed say they feel that the program made them smarter. 99% that it helped me to think better. 95% helped me to get better grades, and 94% gave me more confidence to do well in school. Well, I think that also goes back to comments that were made earlier on the cognitive benefits about these border crossing students. Students who develop the skills of moving back and forth between one culture and one language or another. There's an increasing body of literature that suggests that those students, over the long term, have more positive outcomes in a number of areas.
These aren't really language outcomes. I think they're motivational outcomes that have a huge impact on student engagement and self-regulation and eventual language learning. But
absolutely. So we're seeing all of this work just tying together beautifully, right, with everybody's presentations today. Advantages and disadvantages. Well, the advantages list is quite long. Can communicate with more different people, can talk to extended family members, have a better social life, more fun, dance salsa better, help others, improve the world, translate for others, have more knowledge, intelligence, better future, better jobs, more clients. If you're a lawyer or a doctor, more people want, you've got another bigger client base. Make more money. We're not totally, where's the sunset? Understanding other cultures, learning other languages more easily, impressing others that Anna's with there. But it's hard work, I think is what she's pointing out. These programs are not easy. They're not easy for the teachers, they're not easy for the students. The standards are high, the bar is high. But that's what we want, isn't it? We want.
These sound like kids' comments, which is really interesting.
It does, yeah. It sounds like this almost certainly was a fill in the blank, what did this program do for you, right? I am also a lot smarter than all my friends that know only one language. I can read in one language and understand it in the other.
That's right, that's the key.
Knowing two languages can be an advantage because if you don't know what something means in English, you can try to figure it out in Spanish and translate to English. Also, any other academic things that you do will be easier for you once you're bilingual because another part of your brain is now functioning. I think you saw those brain pictures, right, with those nice white spots on them developing. One more advantage is that knowing another language exercises your brain, which helps you learn better in school. Okay, I think this may actually be the end, and I apologize profusely on Catherine's part for sort of massacring her presentation. But we
as well as at Chicano Studies website, I believe. We'll get you that information. Would you guys like to add anything more about Catherine's work?
No, it was just amazing how consistent all the messages were today, how the research findings converge on a number of broader principles, I think, about how to organize these kinds of programs and what the benefits are.
Yeah, and for those of you who are trying to argue in favor of building these kinds of programs, which have really advantages beyond what we've been able to talk about here. At the Civil Rights Project, we have seen these programs, these dual language programs that bring together speakers of different languages in the same setting as being potentially very powerful tools for desegregating children who are now isolated and segregated in their own communities. We've had very bad decisions in recent years from the Supreme Court on how we can go about desegregating students, and we've had our hands tied. But this is one place they haven't tied our hands, is around language. And language can be a basis on which to desegregate students and take all kids, not just the Latino kids who are so tremendously segregated and isolated in their communities today, particularly in California, but the unfortunate European American children who are also segregated and isolated from all of the rich learning experiences they could have if they were brought together with the mosaic of cultural and linguistic groups that we have in this country. So there is a lot of research here in Catherine's work. She's written extensively about this, and she has a major, major volume out in 2006 with Fred Genesee, Donna Christian, and Catherine Lindholm-Leary that looks at the data on the outcomes, for long-term outcomes for these programs. So I really commend this work to you, because it's a wonderful arrow in your quiver if you want to be building these kinds of programs. So now, with apologies to Catherine, I'll let Octavio take over again, and we do have some time for conversation, because I know that there are questions about these amazing programs that were presented on before we did this. And thank you very much, Lisa Robert, for embarrassing myself with you.
We have about 15 to 20 minutes or less for questions. So, yes, your name, please.
My name is Julia. I don't know if you can hear me.
If you want, it will be nice. Hey.
I have two questions. The first one is for both Karen and Marcos, and the second one is for Marcos. So should I ask both of them?
Yes, let's do both.
Okay. So the first one, so the comment was made about social justice education at both schools, and I was curious about the ways in which, as well as the extent that politicization actually happens at the schools for parents, students, and teachers, and the larger community as well. And then the second question for Marcos is that one of the slides had, and you mentioned too, an emphasis on Indigenous Mexican people. But what about those students and families that lack that connection to their Indigenous roots, due to decades of detribalization? So does the school see that as a concern, and if so, how would it address?
She asked me to go first. I didn't quite understand your first question, so I would appreciate it being repeated. I thought I understood that it was a question of how we teach social justice education.
Yeah, and like how it manifests, and maybe some specific examples of how it occurs.
Well, there's both overt and covert strategies of an education of social justice. The practice of school organizing itself is itself an experience in social justice education. It's a very self-conscious process that engages parents in dialogue about education, about culture, about language, through weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual, biannual meetings, which are held both as open forums, as one-on-one dialogues, as I like the description of the curbside talks, and we have parking lot talks because we use our parking lot as a playground, and so many other different ways. The revindication and praxis of the tequillo. The tequillo is an indigenous institution of volunteerism and community building, which our parents and ourselves engage in as educators. In the classroom, it's through a very conscious curriculum development process which the teachers engage in a collective setting, in commune, creating lessons and lines of inquiry along the IB model, but also with concern with cultural teachings and stories, and even as basic as the concept of Tatacuaxle, who's one of our Nahuatl elders and teachers, teaching the kids about Recabroncísimo, who was a protagonist of a mountain mover in Mexico and in the oral traditions in Nahuatl that he brings from Guerrero. And so there are a whole series of experiences that really are part of an experience, not an experiment, very importantly to us. We've never allowed researchers into the school. We're not particularly discriminatory against researchers, but we didn't open the school with the intent to research what it would do to the kids or to prove anybody's theory, and much less so on dual immersion, with all due respect to dual immersion theory. It's we accept any student that walks in our door and cannot afford to, in our concern for education, exclude those that don't have high language of fluency in one language or the other, so that our model works. And that's important. And that itself is a demonstration of the experience in social justice. The defense of the school involved the students and their parents and their grandparents, and that itself was an experience in closing down streets and organizing marches and having to deal with the media there in an annoying and aggressive way. And it really has been a decade almost of living it, as opposed to just thinking about it and talking about it and writing about it. Now we really got to do more writing about it and talking about it and thinking about it, because we have to take this experience and help spread its impact and help spread its influence and its really remarkable benefits to more of our communities. There should be schools like Semillas all over Arizona, whether the legislators there like it or not.
So the question about social justice we get asked all the time by our teacher ed students, right? What does it mean to teach for social justice? And it's just an impossible question to answer on one level. So let me give you 3 examples, okay? Are students politicized, right? Absolutely. You walk through the halls, you can see all kinds of student organizing around LGBT rights. You can see the Day of Silence. You can see all the student activism groups. The Coalition for Educational Justice is on our site. There's a lot of evidence of organizing and being political, right? The other important example is our history. If you walk into the Embassy Ballroom, which is now the library, you will see these beautiful murals by Judy Baca. One is of Senator Kennedy and the Ripple speech. The other one is of Cesar Chavez and Kennedy breaking the fast. And these students are learning about the history of civil rights in their neighborhood. And they have, we've had activities. One of the most beautiful ones was the upper school students. We're kind of taking some of that private school terminology as well. The upper school students buddied up with a lower school student to read them a story they had written about Robert Kennedy. So we try to build on the legacy of our site and on the community. The other thing that I think is really important, I just can't resist because of the research comment, being a researcher myself, I actually think facilitating and encouraging teacher research at our site is an act of social justice. We are in the middle of a fight right now about what counts as an effective teacher. And I was looking at those value-added scores up there, and this is a very political issue, right? And so what our teachers are doing is they're taking this on very actively and saying, we have these professional learning plans, which are action research projects, which is me being a critical researcher about my own practice. And they consciously do this, and they write them up, and they videotape each other, and Georgia walks in and observes it, and to me, I think it's one of the most profound acts of social justice we have at our site.
So on the question of Indigenous education and Indigenous students, the school does have a center of gravity, and that is the inclusion of Nahuatl. And as far as I know, we're the single and only school in the entire LA Unified School District, and probably anywhere in LA County, that teaches a native language, any native language, as a matter of the curriculum. And so, of course, I would love to hear more schools teaching more native languages. I think the ones that stand out are probably the 3 dominant strands of Zapoteco, Purépecha in Compton, probably 7 different Mayan languages in Central City, and of course, I think every American student should learn the native language of the people in which land they're living. In this case, the Tonga Gabrielino language here. So I would only encourage more of it. In our school, the center of gravity is Nahuatl, and it's one that's self-identified. I've had some parents who originally rejected learning Spanish because they wanted their children to go from being monolingual English speakers as they were to only speaking Nahuatl afterwards. But unfortunately, the way time has to be divided up, the way resources have to be divided up, and the way, at the end of the day, even the parents hold us accountable for the performance of their students, you can't go straight from from Spanish to Nahuatl unless you're surrounded by a Nahuatl-speaking community. That's not even happening in Mexico. And so we had to partner with the IB to create access projects and teachers training projects in Mexico. And last summer met with about 800 Nahuatl teachers to organize help organize with their efforts in Guerrero. We're looking at Morelos and Guerrero in the state of Mexico to develop an IB Nahuatl maternal language school in Mexico, because that doesn't exist. And so we're really dealing with an absence. And we may be the only one, and we only teach one language right now, but we would encourage more. Students that don't speak Nahuatl as a maternal language or an ancestral or a heritage language don't have a problem with it. I have Zapoteca students whose parents are willing for them to learn Nahuatl because their parents in Oaxaca, their grandparents in Oaxaca cannot teach them Nahuatl, do not have the structure to do so here, and they themselves as Zapotecas have lost the language themselves, and would prefer that they learn any other indigenous language if it's being offered. It's of course not enough. Of course we should have more, but it's what we have now.
We have time for about 2 more questions and a brief comment, or make them brief, and we have time for more because at 30 we close. So Gustavo, ladies first. Bear with me for a second. There was a lady in the back. Let's start from the back who had a question next to. Oh, I'm sorry. So next to the lady. A lady. Yes.
I have 3 comments. 30 years ago, the Senate Report bill mandated that languages be taught in the middle school years in grades 7, 8, and 9 for 1 semester. And it was a very successful program, but it died. It allowed that to die. The other point I'd like to make is this: most Mexican American kids speak better English than you would believe. It is not a question of language for them. It's a question of point 3. What is needed, point 3 is, first of all, they don't know what race they belong to. Why are you going to be indigenous when you don't even know what race you belong to? And fourthly, what is needed in the middle of the year is Chicano studies to make them proud of what they are, so they'll know what they are indigenous people. And then they can choose whatever language they wish to learn beyond the English language. And the whole purpose of this country is to assimilate. That's how you do social justice for Chicanos. Thank you. My name is Enrique Carlos Orozco. I'm a USC man for my doctorate. Thank you.
Questions from back to front. We have a gentleman here, but I think there was some more. Yes, Beth.
Thank you for your presentations. I have 2 questions. One in terms of family maybe resistance to this dual language, because sometimes families think, oh, they're learning Spanish at home, they should learn English at school, and I wonder whether you're dealing with that or if that's where all of that. The other piece that I was curious about is, I know the person before equated Spanish and Indigenous, and we know by history that often in Latin America we look down on Indigenous people, and I wonder how are the intergroup relations within the, like for instance, when you are teaching the students Nahuatl, how are the relationships with other Spanish-speaking students? Are they seen positively valued or not valued? Because I think there's always this tension within our own communities.
I'll again encourage you to talk with our principal, Georgia Lazo, at the end about if you want firsthand stories about parents' reaction to our program. She has heard them all. But I will tell you that we have tremendous support from our parents. And it's in no small part because of the work she's done to connect with them, and people like Patricia have done to come and talk in very clear intellectual terms about what's going on and the motivation behind the program and the research behind the program. So we've gotten a lot of very, very positive response. We've gone through a struggle as a school about whether or not our entire school would be dual language, whether there was going to be a class or 2 that were going to be structured English immersion. And we've decided no, that because there are other schools on our site, if a family wants a non-dual language environment, they can go to another school. That if you come to our school, you have to sign the waiver, you have to sign up for learning in 2 languages.
we've had to engage in a lot of education amongst ourselves as a community. The first question, the first brick wall we hit with parents was, why do you want to include Chinese? They got now what? They didn't have a problem with that. They understood Spanish, but why Chinese? And this was 2001. By 2004, we were teaching more students Chinese than the entire LA Unified School District. The LA Unified School District, largely through our efforts in educating them about the importance of Chinese, and others were a part of the Mandarin in the Schools Committee, which we've met with for several years now, that's promoting Chinese instruction in LAUSD. They've expanded it. It's a much larger program now. But what's most stressful, and I think it's just for children, I think Teatro Campesino said something like, La escuela no me sirve de nada, but then I need to go to university to learn about my people and my culture. Kinder is a very stressful year. And so our job as educators is to make it as least stressful as possible. But having to deal with the language that you don't know, especially, or even if you're a Chicano English speaker who's learning Spanish, is very stressful for both the child and the student. And we can do a lot of things to mitigate that, but it's still a stressful period. And that's when we've experienced lately, over the last few years, because everybody else more or less gets it, the questioning of the language model because of the stress of the child. But that has to do with good teaching in the classroom and good support for the child and good camaraderie amongst the students as well. The interrelations among the students, I can tell you that I have students who, as recently as December, we enrolled, had been ditching their entire life from school and are in our school, and we can't like incentivize them going home enough. They don't leave at the end of the day. We have a 99% attendance rate, the last I checked, and our up until this year, our biggest problem were very minor. We have a very low rate of student violence. Bullying is serious to them at the time, but when you look at what happens in traditional public school systems, it's very minor. So there's a very low level of that type of stress. And Dr. Chris Gutierrez actually, in her support of us in 2006, actually brought in one of her research students. And in that instance, she did do, with the parents' permission, a study between sibling relationships and how interesting that was. And that was very positive also, that she indicated in our school as opposed to other schools that they had studied. Inter-student relations are being impacted right now by gang violence around our community. El Sereno's a gang hot zone, has been for a while. It's been really calm for the last 10 years, but it's now picking up again. And I think it has to do a lot with the lack of resources for intervention and the increase in police presence, and of course, the cycles of gang release, and a prison release or jail release and reincarceration. So all in all, as a community school, people look, especially in the middle school, people look to enroll their students in our school to avoid having to deal with 5 or 6 girls cornering you in the girls' restroom at the local middle school and beating the pulp out of you. And it's a very different dynamic.